Nicaragua, as many other Central American countries, were part of the Spanish Empire, were colonized, were pillaged by Spanish colonialism. In the early 1800s, Nicaragua joined other Central American countries as part of the Central American Federation that was led by Francisco Morazan, who is from modern-day Honduras. Francisco Morazan is considered by many to be like the Bolivar of Central America. Shout out to Christina, by the way, who's watching and tuning in. And Morazan was important because his vision was of Central American unity, of unity against imperialism, because he understood that even though they were free from the Spanish, the US was going to be the next empire and they had to remain united. And so in the 1800s, there was a Central American Federation. Nicaragua was part of that, as well as Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. Unfortunately, in Costa Rica was a hotbed of resistance, of bourgeois nationalism to Central American unity. Morazan was eventually killed. The countries were fragmented and split, Nicaragua being one of the countries that was fragmented. And into the 1800s, you had a lot of attempts by the US, the rising US empire, to try to colonize and expand, especially the Confederacy, into Nicaragua. You had somebody by the name of William Walker, who in 1855 or 1856 actually went to Nicaragua on a boat, some random white dude from fucking Tennessee or something, and was just like, I'm the president of Nicaragua now. What's good? I'm the leader. And this is an important part of the history because Nicaraguan anti-imperialism goes back to the mid-1800s. They still remember William Walker and what he did and his atrocities, going into their country, declaring himself president, and trying to expand the Confederacy into Nicaragua, establish a slave plantation as a country. And so eventually in Nicaragua, the forces of Florencio Satruch and others, a Honduran general, and the Nicaraguan people resisted William Walker and the US imperialists. Later on in the early 1900s, you have the anti-imperialist hero known as Sandino, Augusto César Sandino, who is one of the heroes, one of my favorite revolutionaries in Latin America. I actually got a shirt of him right now, Patria Libre o Morir, which is the slogan. Camarada Estero has a shirt with Sandino as well. So Sandino is a very revolutionary, inspiring Sandino mug. There you go. We got all decked out Sandino stuff. And he's somebody who is not only a anti-imperialist, a socialist, a revolutionary, but he's also indigenous. He's also organizing transnational movements. He's organizing with Farabundo Martí in El Salvador, who is the founder of the Central American Communist Party. He was organizing with José Carlos Mariátegui, writing letters in Peru. He was somebody who was very active, and he actually took up the armed struggle against the U.S. Marines in the 1920s when Nicaragua was still being invaded like every other week by the U.S. He directly confronted Marines in armed struggle. He was a guerrilla fighter. And unfortunately, he was captured and assassinated, but his heroic battle inspired the Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional in the 60s, which was founded by Carlos Fonseca, Tomás Borja, and other revolutionaries who founded the Frente, the FSLN, which is today remains the ruling party of Nicaragua. In 1979, they had the Sandinista Revolution. That's the beautiful flag that they rock in Nicaragua of the Frente. And in 1979, the Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional was actually able to overthrow the Somoza family dynasty, a dictatorship of white settlers, criollos, aligned with U.S. imperialism, aligned with the European capitalist class who was repressing leftists. We're talking about a family dynasty that ruled the country for 40, 50, 60 years, for a long time. And the Frente Sandinista overthrew them. They were building socialism. They were building campesino power related to the conditions of Nicaraguan society, blending socialism, Catholicism, Marxism, indigenous culture. And so immediately after the Sandinistas came into power in 1979, Reagan was elected in 1980. The U.S., they started the Contra War, the Contra Revolucionarios, counter-revolutionaries that were armed and trained in Honduras, where my family's from. And they not only were sent to try to attack and commit terrorist acts against the Nicaraguan people, but they also funneled drugs and money to the United States in cooperation with the DEA. And we're talking about revelations that came out from Oliver North, from Gary Webb, really important work in debunking the role of the Contras. And the Contras were branded as these revolutionaries, as these heroes, these pro-democracy freedom fighters in the mainstream media. And they were right-wing terrorists backed by the U.S., backed by CIA, who were bringing drugs into the US, crack cocaine. They were working in collaboration with the drug cartels in Colombia. They were bringing cocaine into the streets of New York, of LA, and also attacking the Panther movement, the Young Lords, the Brown Berets. And so the Nicaraguan people have been at the intersection of imperialism, of capitalism, of drugs, of all this stuff since throughout that time period. And a big reason Nicaragua does not necessarily have natural resources like oil that Venezuela has that's extremely valuable. I think with Nicaragua, what's most important and resourceful is its geopolitical position, located on one of the narrowest points of the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And for years, people have tried to construct a canal to connect both, to challenge the Panama Canal controlled by the US. And so Nicaragua has always been geographically positioned in a way that the imperialists have wanted that piece of land. And so into the 80s, the Sandinista government, led by Daniel Ortega, continued to fight against the Contras, continued to fight against the imperialists. Unfortunately, in 1990, during the election, Violeta Chamorro with the UNO coalition, a neoliberal government and faction, took over after the elections. They rolled back all of the progress on the Sandinista revolution. And we're talking about a few years that the Sandinistas were in power, but it was so many accomplishments. The literacy campaigns, 1980, the alfabetización campaña that they started with the ATC, that we were just part of that delegation to help campesinos and poor people learn how to read and write. Women's liberation, nationalizing key industries, land redistribution, so many progressive policies that were instituted. And that was rolled back in 1990. So from 1990 to 2007 was a neoliberal period of Nicaragua, when Nicaragua was the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Everything was privatized, very similar to what Honduras is today. 2007, Daniel Ortega, who's the president now, and compañera Rosario Murillo, the vice president, who's also his wife, re-elected into power, and now is the government of unity and reconciliation, where they're building infrastructure, they're collaborating with Venezuela and Cuba, joining ALBA, joining CELAC, trading with Iran, Russia, China, building up the infrastructure and the means of production to uplift millions of people out of poverty, and they have. They've done a really impressive job, and that's what we're going to be talking about today.